So the global carbon cycle is essentially the flow of carbon around the planet. Well, global warming is a side effect of a disruption of the global carbon cycle. Because we're essentially burning fossil fuels, we're making those changes very rapidly. So things that took 1,000 or 10,000 years, we're making those changes in 100 years now. That's why we need to understand all the flows and the reservoirs in this global carbon cycle. I'm leading 2 of these ARC discovery projects. First of these projects is resolving the role of dry land flooding in the global carbon cycle. These dry land areas actually also take up CO2 out of the atmosphere. And it's been shown recently that part of that uptake is significant on a global scale. But the one thing that is missing from that work is they haven't looked at the effects of flooding on these dry lands. So this project is actually about quantifying those greenhouse gas emissions from these flooded dry lands. The theory from it is that there'll be a significant contribution, at least a few percent to 10% to global greenhouse gas emission, as I have NASA, who will be using satellite imagery to quantify the emissions from these flooded dry lands as well. So we'll be measuring the emissions from the bottom up, going out and taking field samples, and they'll actually be using satellite imagery to actually estimate emissions as well. So we'll be putting those 2 approaches together. The second project is looking at carbonate sediment dissolution. We're putting anthropogenic CO2 into the atmosphere when we burn fossil fuels. A proportion, or about 30% of that, is being absorbed by the oceans. When we absorb that CO2, it's also making the oceans more acidic. So we term that ocean acidification. Now, there's a natural process that occurs in the ocean because the ocean's are lined with carbonate sediments, particularly on the continental shelves. Carbonate sediments, you can think of coral reefs. When they actually dissolve, these sediments dissolve, they actually consume some of the CO2 in the seawater. So it actually is a way of taking up some of that CO2 that we're putting in the atmosphere and into the ocean, and also that reduces the amount of ocean acidification that occurs. The role of carbonate sediment dissolution we think is underestimated. So this project is about putting a better estimate on the role of that carbonate dissolution in the global carbon budget.